Hey, Craig. I was walking around the shop today and I was thinking about rust, as one will. And, you know, rust is annoying as hell. It's one of those things you often don't see it until the damage is done. When the shiny paint starts to blister, underneath you got trouble. And that made me start thinking about our government these days, naturally. We've we've got a nice paint job. We'll call that the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. That describes our car, right? And it's still described the same, and we expect it to be the same, right? I mean, it's the same old car, same old country. But underneath the paint, there's all kinds of stuff going on. You know, the interior still kind of looks the same. We jump in and out, and everything about it seems familiar. But under the hood and all attached to the chassis and stuff, weird stuff's been going on. There's been rust. Let me explain. We know the people we elect to some degree. They tell us what they stand for. We elect them according to that, and we hope that they hold on to that to some degree, right? Now, we know too many people lose touch with the folks back home once they get out to Washington. And we know something about their record. We get the reports back, but there's over 2 million people that work for the federal government, and there's, I think, another 6 million contractors. There's a lot of people involved. We know nothing about these people. There's all kinds of different departments and agencies and stuff within the government we've never even heard of. So imagine this car that you have, the Constitution covered car. Under the hood and all kinds of weird little modules and devices and thingamajigs that we really don't know anything about. And over time, those things swell up kind of like rust does. It just swells up with more people, more importance. A lot of times they get away from, what they were supposed to be doing in the first place, and they somehow they grab more power, and they morph into this thing that we hadn't seen before, because they have to justify their existence to some degree. Because even though they're not voted, the people who we do vote for go in and they intend to make changes, right? They usually tell us that. And so they'll look at these departments and maybe they'll identify some that, well, we could make a change here, make a change there. But, almost nothing happens, right? It just seems to continue to grow. And that's how we wound up with, millions and millions of federal employees that if you try to call, let's say, the IRS right now, good luck. Good luck getting anyone on the phone. Good luck having them not hang up on you. It's very, very frustrating. And from the reports we've seen, there's almost nobody in Washington D.C. right now. They're all working remotely, I guess because of the pandemic. But it's a weird thing. The rest of the country, we're all kind of back to normal, other than these ridiculous mandates we're being threatened with. But in Washington, it's not that way at all. People are working remotely. So we know even less. We can't even reach out and deal with these people in a lot of cases. And even the people we did vote for, or the people we're familiar with, we're not even sure what they're up to at this point. We don't hear anything. It's all happening under the hood in the darkness. And I suspect that it's a ton of rust. It's how rust is when it's working. It expands, right? It's like it's the metal's being converted into rust, and it sort of grows, and sometimes it turns into these little sort of pods of rust, these flakes of rust that might flake off, but they have their own autonomy. They're it's its own thing. Yeah, I've been looking at rust a lot today, but you probably know what I'm talking about. You've seen this stuff before, and that's kind of what we have. We've got these things that have morphed and changed. They're sort of separated out from the rest, and they've turned into something that we don't even recognize before. And while all this is happening, while all these offices are kind of swelling up with self-importance and and they're not accountable really to anybody. No one ever seems to get in any trouble if they screw up, right? They might get moved over to a different division or something like that, but you know how it is in federal government. It's very hard to get booted out of there. They like to add more numbers. That's one of those things. But we're making jobs. The problem with making government jobs is that those jobs will never make any money. They'll just cost us money. If there are jobs in a company, each position has to be justified because a company is trying to make money. It's trying to make enough profit to invest in its future, to buy new machines, follow new technology, and so you can't do all that stuff if you have too many people that aren't doing anything. You've got to get the most bang for the buck out of your people, especially these days because it's hard to even find anyone to work for you in the first place. But in government, it's not like that. It's sort of like you're encouraged to just fill out your office, get as many people in there as you can. Now, granted, there is a budgetary process, and certainly some people are trying to be serious about this, and they're not trying to grow out of bounds. But we don't get to 2 million employees and all these contractors with people being careful. This is rust. It's just expanding. It's getting bigger. And as it's doing that, we keep dropping other little things in there, which might aggravate the situation. So, again, where the car looks the same, it's cloaked in that paint of the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the stuff underneath is changing all the time, and it's kind of swelling. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to notice some bubbling under the paint, right? We're going to realize that something's not quite right. And that's where we are. Look at the First Amendment. Look at freedom of speech. We've seen more censorship than I've ever witnessed in my life in this country. Third world countries don't seem to suffer quite this bad, unless it's under Sharia law or something, which, congratulations, I see that's back in Afghanistan. People hanging off of cranes and stuff. Awesome. Good work, guys. But back to the rust thing, right? So we've got all these different agencies that have kind of, they're flakes of rust. They're self-important. They've built themselves into their own little bundle. And, a good example of that right now is, the lack of accountability. We have this problem right now of shipping goods. We've all heard the stories of ships floating around outside of the ports in California and wherever else major ports are, waiting to unload. And things are going very, very slowly inside these ports. And people are wondering why. We're given all kinds of reasons. There's COVID. It's always COVID. And so there's not as many people working. People are out sick. We can't get the trucks. There's not enough truck drivers, or this reason or that reason. But now what we're hearing is that, California is an example. Everything's unionized inside that port, and everything has to follow very strict instructions. And so, your truck has to be spotlessly clean, stuff like that to go in there. So private contractors have a very hard time getting in and out of ports like that. It's built to exclude them. It's built to accommodate the union guys, and it's built to exclude the non-union guys. It's kind of the same old story. But when we get in a pinch like we are right now, you need to kind of work your way around it. And then we find out that, the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, I can usually say it until I'm talking to the camera. Buttigieg? Mayor Pete? Anyway, Secretary of Transportation, find out that he's been on leave for the last 2 months, maternity leave, because he and his husband have adopted 2 children, and so he's taking time off to raise the kids. Great job if you can get it. But, how about all the rest of the people in this country that are working, that have suffered through all of this craziness and now are looking at these pretend mandates coming down to get vaccinated? But that's what I'm saying is we've got people in the government that aren't being held accountable, that don't take their job terribly seriously because they're not worried about their flake of rust being chipped off and tossed away. This rust just keeps building and building and building and building underneath. And, it's to a size now where there's not much you can do about it. It's kind of like the whole vehicle is held together by rust. If we start to chip away at it, we might not have anything left to hold that paint up. And that's a scary proposition right now because, obviously this country's in a great deal of hurt right now. You can blame all kinds of different things. You can blame the virus. You can blame corrupt governors or people inside of the federal government doing a horrible job. You can blame all these extremely wealthy people that run all the banks and therefore all the boards on the big businesses and all that stuff. And certainly they all deserve blame. They've all basically taken this car and dipped it in the salt water, because of their needs. They haven't been taking care of that car at all. They're not even worried about that car. They are getting what they can out of it. They're building their little rust flakes here and there and everywhere else, and they're stuffing little modules under the hood. They're just jamming that full of all kinds of stuff it doesn't need. Eventually it will fail, but they seem to be doing just fine. Just ducky. Because who's going to hold them accountable? No one's been able to so far. We're seeing things like, the courts, they're not interested in going after these things that are sticky like that. Look at the vote. The vote is a mess, and we know this. The Arizona audit showed us all kinds of fraud inside that vote. In other states, they've seen the same sort of results. You see the numbers. You see how the algorithm, you can plug this into any county in a state. Once you know the basic algorithm for that state, you can determine exactly what the vote looks like. And then once you put it up against it, wow, it matches the algorithm exactly. We're seeing so many examples of fraud that have to be cleaned up. And, and it's not even that hard to figure out where all this came from. We know before this election, there was a huge push to change the voting laws to accommodate the mail-in votes, among other things. And even in states where that is specifically denied, they still changed the laws. And what happened is, you had very powerful lawyers, law offices. Actually, the one specific that seems to have a lot to do with it is going through a lot of trouble right now with the Durham investigation. This is going to be very interesting because the same folks that were behind the Steele dossier and the hacked server. Remember the whole hacked server thing, the DNC server? It's like, Russia's hacked the server to give information to Trump, which was, completely false. The funny thing is they wouldn't let the FBI actually look at the server. They sent it off to, CrowdStrike or something like that, a Ukrainian company that specializes in all kinds of hocus-pocus computer stuff. And remember the phone call, Trump's phone call with Ukraine? These guys came up in that whole thing under the Bidens and all that. It's all interconnected into the same lawyers and the same group. But the deal was, again, with these lawyers that helped the campaign with the Steele dossier and they tried to sort of conjure up this whole server thing that never really flew. The same guys sent out teams of lawyers to most all the states to help try to push these changes in the law. Now, the Constitution is really specific that the legislature is tasked with watching out for the elections, to approving any changes in election laws. And basically the state legislature is being held responsible for the presidential election. They're supposed to make sure that what is verified as their electorates is true and correct. And of course, we know that there was a lot of contested electors being sent up there. Several states sent a separate group up there to try to make the case that they didn't feel like that their vote should be certified. They already saw all kinds of anomalies and things to cause concern. But what they ran into is the rust. These lawyers came out there and they created all kinds of change without people really paying much attention. And so when we got into the election, these new laws were in place. They weren't approved by the right people or anything like that, but nonetheless, they were the new rules. People abided by them to a certain degree, and that caused a lot of trouble. in that they allowed a lot of private money to go into very specific cities and areas that were very, very strong Democrat-controlled areas, and they unfairly sort of fortified the vote for these specific areas and not outside of there. So in other words, let's say, in the city itself, these guys get tens of millions of dollars for drop boxes, for people, practically concierge service, walking door to door, getting people to vote, a lot of hand holding, and Lord knows what else. There seems to be a lot of voting. There's ballots that don't have envelopes, and there's all that kind of weird stuff too. But these guys created this additional rust. They sent these lawyers out there to help teach the local people who, let's say, were predisposed to play around with the vote, and they taught them how to do it. And they were very clever and sort of specific to different areas. So you think about that. There's a law firm out there right now, and this one guy, Sussman's been indicted, and then there's others. I think Ellis. They're looking at Mark Ellis. He quit the firm, but he was in this stuff really big time. I think they're looking at billing records now, so they must be in there pretty deep. This Durham investigation is starting to open up big time. It's going to be interesting. But again, what's Durham been doing? He's been scraping the rust. He's been kind of flicking those flakes of rust off of the frame, if you will, so that we can take a look at it and say, "Whoa, what's that doing there?" Say, yeah, that's not quite right. He's connecting all the pieces of this rust and trying to figure out. Just at least that's one tendril of rust out there, right? This is the bad election rust. How did we get to this point? Who's in charge? Who's responsible? It's so incredibly complicated. I don't know how they're going to do it, but it's interesting that going through the lawyers is, lawyers of course have billing records. I mean, lawyers live for billing records. A billing opportunity is a billing opportunity, and they're not going to lose out on it. And they have to be very specific about who worked on what. So once you get access to that teaches you an awful lot. Who did what, when, where. But there's so many different agencies in the government. I mean, the harder you look at them, the more rust you see, the more you see how it's swollen up. And again, if you've ever dealt with rust, once you see that it's really, really rusty underneath, you start to feel pretty nervous about taking that thing out on the road. It's like, well, what kind of stress is this thing going to be able to handle? If I hit a big bump, is it going to crack in half? So here's our country. It's very rusty underneath. We can still make out the form. The paint job is still there. But we've certainly seen, several different amendments. The first and second come to mind right away. But, we've seen attacks from within, right? It's not so much, we know the guys outside. We know that Russia and China and Iran and all these guys, they're certainly trying to destabilize us any way they can. That's how it works. We know that. But this is all internal. This is rust from underneath the paint. This is the people that, we put in a position of authority, and they've not only abused that authority, I think they've abused it really badly right now. The way they've dealt with the virus and all that, and it's just not being honest with us, trying to pump all this up and create all the fear just so that we won't pay attention to all the rust that they're making over there. So as we look at this rust and we wonder what to do about it, we're wondering if this thing, do you have to start all over again? I don't think we do. I think the rust makers have been trying to convince us that the whole vehicle is shot and we got to get rid of it and start out with a whole new vehicle. Communism. Well, socialism, communism. But in fact, the vehicle is okay. They've stuffed a bunch of crap underneath it. There's a lot of rust, but it's not so. The meat's still there. We got to scrape out the rust. We have to paint the surfaces with something to protect it again. We need to take care of this thing. And the folks that we sent off to take care of it have been pouring salt water all over it. They have not taken care of it. So, you know, it comes down to us. It comes down to people. You know, there's no. I don't see the military jumping in or the courts jumping in or, you know, anything like that. I think it's really just the people who care about that car, you know, willing to get out there and just kind of put in the sweat equity to, you know, join the school boards, do whatever, or just, you know, talk about it. You know, we weren't, remember, polite people don't talk about government or religion and stuff like that. And it's like, that's bullshit. We should be talking about this a whole lot. We all should understand it really well. We should be asking questions of these people who are running things and we put in positions of authority. And we should demand, hey, how much rust have you gotten rid of? You know, let's see it. We need to look under the hood. We need to look at the chassis. And we need to demand it at this point because these people, this rust has gotten away with building up and making a big mess because we haven't looked under the hood in a long time. And now we're kind of being forced to. And it's pretty ugly, but it's not lost. But we need to get to work. You know, it's just, there's not a magic silver bullet that's going to take care of this. It's just going to take a lot of work from everybody to clean it up. But I think we're kind of at the point where people are willing to do it. They're willing to be more involved. They're doing the research because they've seen how the people they trusted have misled them and let them down. They've seen the abuse throughout, you know, this whole pandemic. And, you know, especially the people who had to wear a mask and do all this stuff throughout and just kept working while a lot of people sat on their butts and didn't work. You know, telling them, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, while they themselves don't really bother to do it. You know, but there's those folks that have shown up and worked hard. Truck drivers, restaurant folks, you name it. You know, just the people that you see every day out there working, busting their ass, and they've had to deal with all this nonsense. And then at the very end of this thing, all of a sudden, oh, you know what? You've got to get vaccinated. Mandate. Bull. There's a lot of great reasons not to be vaccinated. One of the best reasons is that you've probably already had the thing, right? You know, remember how it was like so contagious. And it is, and it's bad, but I've seen it right here in this town. I mean, it went right through here immediately. It was like March of last year. And then the D variant, right when everyone went back to school, boom, it blew up around here. All of us had it. The natural immunity is superior by far. And the beauty of the natural immunity is it keeps chewing on that virus and makes it weaker and weaker and weaker. And we're all kind of like, you know, chewing on it with our natural immunity, making it weaker. Unfortunately, the people who are vaccinated aren't chewing on it. You know, their bodies don't realize they're sick because of the vaccine. And so they're carrying a full load of the virus with them all the time, not chewing it down and spreading it around. Of course, that would make the vaccinated people very upset to hear us talk like that, almost talking like they do to us. It's like, I'm not going to get vaccinated. I've had the virus twice. I have allergies to weird stuff. I'm sure I'm one of those guys that would not react very well to this weird new vaccine, so I'm just not even going to consider it. But for whatever reason, people have their reasons. There's plenty of people who have been vaccinated at this point. That wasn't supposed to be how this thing works. And now, of course, if you were vaccinated, then you had to have your follow-up shot. Then now you have to have a booster, and then you'll have to have boosters forever. But the fact of the matter is, it's a virus. It'll be here forever. So you might as well just build up immunities against it the old-fashioned way and just get done with it. We have great treatments for it. They don't tell you that. The hospitals don't even stock this stuff, and a lot of times they'll fire the doctors if they even try to give you some of these treatments. But you know about them already. You've heard about it. And certainly, again, that's another case of rust. You know, our healthcare system rusted up from Obamacare, just turned into a huge mess. They've administrationed it to death. So we see all these examples. We see what rust does. We know what rust does. And I think collectively, we just want to get rid of it. So let's start getting rid of it. Best way to do it is just chip off those flakes. So as you run across a flake, chip them off. I don't know how to do it, but we're talking about it. And that's going to strengthen it up. People will understand more and more. And that's really what it's all about. If we understand it, they can't pull the wool over our eyes. So we got to get there. Anyway, Rust, thanks for listening. Have a great day.